Okay, today we're combining two more lessons. We're doing 5.18 and 5.19. And today your learning goal is to draw and classify, which as we know means to sort, rectangles, rhombuses, kites, and squares. So how many different kinds of polygons are we talking about today? 4. Rectangles, rhombuses, kites, and squares. And we're doing that based on their attributes. What's another word for attributes? Everyone say it out loud. Properties or characteristics, okay, or facts about them. Let's first talk about the problem of the day, though. In our glossary, look for the word rectangle, okay? Now, we can see that a rectangle is a parallelogram that has 4 right angles. Now, by calling it a parallelogram, that already gives us a lot of information. That tells us it's a polygon. It tells us it's a quadrilateral, and it tells us it has how many sets of parallel lines? 2. So, an example might look like this, right? You have 2 sets of parallel lines, and it's quadrilateral, and all 4 angles are right angles. So go ahead and write down the definition for rectangle and draw yourself an example and a non-example. Okay, moving along. A square is a rectangle with 4 congruent sides. Okay, so by calling it a rectangle, what does that mean? It means it's a parallelogram. It means it has how many right angles? 4 right angles, right? Because it has to have all the requirements of a rectangle, but it has something extra. What else does it need to have? 4 congruent sides. What does congruent mean again? Equal. So I know it needs to be a polygon, so it needs to be a closed figure. It needs to have 4 sides and 4 angles because it's a quadrilateral. It needs to have 2 sets of parallel lines, right? It needs to have 4 right angles. And I can show that all 4 sides are congruent by drawing those tick marks. The next word is rhombus. Everyone say rhombus. Now a rhombus, is it a square? No. It could be. A rhombus is a parallelogram. So what does that tell us? How many sides does it have? 4. It has how many sets of parallel lines? 2. Okay, so far, does the square fit it? Does the rectangle fit it? Yeah, it has 2 sets of parallel lines. It's a quadrilateral. But it needs to have 4 congruent sides. So is a rectangle a rhombus? No, because it doesn't have 4 congruent sides. Is a square a rhombus? Yeah. A square is a special type of rhombus that has 4 right angles. Now, does a rhombus need to have 4 right angles? No. So if I had something like this, where I had 2 sets of parallel lines, right, and all 4 sides are congruent, but it has no right angles, is that still a rhombus? Yes. Okay, so as long as it's a parallelogram that has 4 congruent sides, it doesn't matter what the angles are, it is a rhombus. Go ahead and write it down and draw your examples and non-examples. So if a rhombus is a parallelogram with 4 congruent sides, here's how you draw one. You are going to draw an angle, any angle. It could be 90 degrees, it could be 45 degrees, it could be 60 degrees, but what's important is you need to make sure the 2 lengths are equal lengths. Does that make sense? Go ahead and do that in your notebook. Remember, a rhombus is a special type of what? Parallelogram, isn't it? Doesn't it have 2 sets of equal lines, of parallel lines, I should say? All 4 sides are congruent. Now, what do you notice about the angles? These 2 opposite angles are the same. Doesn't that make sense? Because it's a parallelogram. So we can see that opposite angles are the same. And the ones right next to each other equal what? 180 degrees. Very good. So a rectangle is a parallelogram that has 4 right angles. So here's how you draw a right angle. You could use a protractor to measure it, but could you also use the corner of your straight edge if it's not bent? Okay, yeah, you could. So what you do is you draw 1 set of parallel lines, and you draw another side of parallel lines using this, the corner right here, to make right angles. Okay, go ahead and draw a quick rectangle in your notebook. Now, if we look at the 4 angles, remember the pattern was the ones on top and below of each other add up to 180? Is that still the case here? And before we also noticed that all 4 angles add up to 360. Is that still the case here? Interesting. Okay, very good. All parallelograms are rhombuses. False. What conditions need to be there in order for a parallelogram to be a rhombus? Jack?
A rhombus has 4 congruent sides.
Very good. A rhombus has 4 congruent sides. Not all parallelograms have 4 congruent sides, but some do. And the ones that do are called rhombuses. Now, when you're thinking about rhombuses, I like to think in my head rhombus, so I don't forget that silent H there, okay? Okay, true or false? All rhombuses are parallelograms. True, nice. Okay. True or false? All parallelograms are rectangles. False. Rectangles are a special type of parallelogram. What condition must be there in order for a parallelogram to be also called a rectangle? Itai?
It needs 4 right angles.
It needs 4 right angles. You got it. Okay, true or false? All rectangles are parallelograms. True. So if something is a rectangle, it's automatically also a parallelogram. Got it? All trapezoids are rhombuses.
False.
Why is that false, Arun?
Because rhombuses have 2 pairs of equal lengths, and like all of the sides are equal lengths, and a trapezoid has only 1 pair of parallel lines.
You told me about 2 different things. You said basically like oranges are orange and apples are a fruit. You said rhombuses have 4 congruent sides and trapezoids only have...
Trapezoids don't have 4 congruent sides.
Is that what defines a trapezoid and a rhombus?
No.
Jiba, give it a try.
A rhombus is a parallelogram, which makes it have two opposite pairs of parallel lines.
Oh.
Trapezoid only have 1 parallel.
You got it. So a trapezoid only has 1 set of parallel lines, whereas a rhombus has how many sets of parallel lines? 2. When you're comparing and contrasting, you need to talk about the same thing. I can't say that Sporty is a girl and Lakshan's wearing a red shirt. That doesn't help me compare and contrast them because I'm comparing different attributes. Okay? Okay. Last one. All true or false? All parallelograms are quadrilaterals. True. Very nice. Okay. If a square is a quadrilateral with 4 right angles and 4 congruent sides, it is a rhombus with right angles. It's also a rectangle with 4 congruent sides, right? So here's how you draw it. Once again, if we're talking about congruent sides, it's very important to measure the length of each side. So draw a line that's 2 inches long. Then you're going to use the corner of your ruler to make some 90-degree angles. And then you're going to draw 2-inch segments on each side. And then you're going to make, again, a right angle. And then draw another 2 inches and then make a right angle. Okay, you're going to show using tick marks that all 4 sides are congruent. And you're going to draw using that right angle symbol to show that all 4 angles are right angles. So far, let's talk about the biggest category we've had is polygons. Go ahead and write that down. Now, under polygons, we got a little more specific and talked about quadrilaterals. Are all quadrilaterals polygons?
Yes.
But are all polygons quadrilaterals? No. Do you see how we're getting more and more specific here, right? And then in the quadrilaterals, we talked about 2 different kinds. We talked about parallelograms and we talked about trapezoids, right? Right, guys?
Yes.
Okay. Now, under parallelograms, we talked about squares, squares. No, sorry. What would be the next broadest one? Rectangles, thank you. And we also talked about rhombuses, thank you. Right? Now, a special type of rectangle and a special type of rhombus is a square. Do you see how it's getting more and more specific, right? We saw that for all quadrilaterals, the angles on top and below each other add up to what? 180 degrees. So that all 4 angles add up to 360 degrees, right? And then we found that for all parallelograms, opposite angles were what? The same, and another word for that is congruent. The next polygon we are going to talk about still is a polygon, and it still is a quadrilateral, but it is not a trapezoid, and it is not a parallelogram. So we need to draw a 3rd branch here, and those are the kites. Okay. This slide right here, even though I wrote it very sloppy, is very important because it helps you know what is more specific and what is a broader term. For example, this shows you, if I say, are all quadrilaterals trapezoids, you can say the answer is no. But if I say, are all trapezoids quadrilaterals, you say the answer is
Yes.
If I say, are all parallelograms rectangles, you would say
No.
But if I said, are all squares rectangles, you would say
Yes.
Do you see how this chart works? Okay, give me a thumbs up if you've written down this chart. Very good. A kite is a quadrilateral. It's not a trapezoid or a parallelogram. It's a quadrilateral where two consecutive sides, meaning two sides right next to each other, have equal length, and then the other two sides also have equal length. Does that make sense? So an example would be if two consecutive sides have the same length, and then the other two sides have the same length as well. Do you see that?
Yeah.
Okay, so these two are congruent, and these two are also congruent. So copy down the definition, give yourself an example and a non-example.